Hello and welcome to your basic introduction to Premiere Pro CS6. Start by opening Premiere Pro by double-clicking on the purple icon. When we open Premiere Pro, we have the option to create a new project or open an existing project. We're going to create a new project today. We're going to leave all the settings up the top as is and click Browse to make sure that whenever we save, the files are saving to a folder I've created on my external hard drive specifically for the contents of this project. We're going to give the project a name and click OK. Next, we're asked to specify our sequence presets. The settings we'll need to use will depend on what camera we've shot our footage on. If you've used a JackTech Canon FS200 camera like I have, you'll need to click DV-PAL and then widescreen 48 kHz. If you've used a DSLR camera, select Digital SLR 1080p, DSLR 1080p 25. If you've used a MaPS JackTV Canon XF100 video camera, select Canon XF MPEG-2 1080p, 1080p 25. But for now, we'll click on DV-PAL widescreen 48 kHz. Now as Premiere Pro opens, you can see the interface and layout of the program. We've got our import bin in the bottom left-hand corner, and we're going to start straight up by moving this up into the top left-hand corner, as it makes the whole interface a little easier to work with. And we'll do so by simply clicking on the Project Bin tab, clicking and holding down and moving it upwards until the top left-hand section of the screen highlights in purple, as you can see now, and then we simply let go and drop the project import bin. Now, to the right of where we've just moved our import bin is our source monitor, and we use our source monitor to preview our vision, and we also use it to select snippets of our vision that we'd like to use. Beneath our source monitor, we have our effects tab. So you'll see the source monitor has a small tab at the top that says source monitor, and to the right of that, there's a small tab that says effects. Now, if we click on this tab, it will open up effects. However, we can't see much here at the moment because we need to have clips down on the timeline and selected. But we will come back to this later in the tutorial. To the right of that is our program monitor, and that's where whatever we have on the timeline will play out. So basically whatever is played out in the program monitor is a reflection of what's on the timeline and essentially what our finished product's going to look like. So we can see it in the making, and we can see it just before we export and make sure it's exactly what we want it to look like. Beneath that all, we have our timeline, and our timeline is where we are going to do all of our work today. It's where we're going to place all of our video, and we're going to put it in the order that we want it and the correct duration, etc. You'll notice that on the timeline we have several layers of video and several layers of audio, and I'll show you how this works later in the tutorial. To the left of the timeline we have a small toolbox that's got some of the tools that we're going to be using in the tutorial today. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, the most important thing that we're going to use today is the Effects tab. And inside the Effects tab, we've got different video and audio effects and different video and audio transitions. Okay, now we're ready to import some files for us to work with today. The best way to do this is to use the media browser. I've saved my video files in the same folder as my project file, so I'm navigating to find them now. It's really important to keep all your files together in the one folder, as Premiere Pro doesn't store your source files in the project itself. It has to find them every time you open the project, so it's really important to not separate the project file from the source files, and also important to make sure all your files are on the one location, so on the one external hard drive or the one computer, and not on 10 different USBs. There are several different ways to import files into Premiere Pro, such as pressing Ctrl-I on your keyboard and then navigating to your files, or right-clicking in the import bin and navigating to your files and clicking OK. But the reason we use the media browser is that when you're using the JackTV MaPS Canon XF100 camera, it creates quite large files that are then broken up into 2 GB chunks. However, the media browser can interpret these files as one big file, so they all come in as one video as opposed to several smaller ones. So that's why we use the media browser. Once you've located the files you want to import via the media browser, like I have on your screen now, drag them into the project bin. And also make sure you wait for the files that you have just imported to conform. So you'll see in the bottom right hand corner of the screen, there is a yellow progress bar that loads and it's telling you that the files you've just imported are conforming. And you need to wait for those to be finished conforming because in the meantime you might notice that if you bring your video down onto the timeline, it might not have any audio and you can often corrupt files. So you don't want to interrupt this process. Just wait until they're finished conforming and make sure everything's as it should be. Okay, so the very first thing we want to do before we bring any files down onto the timeline is if we're working with a file with audio, we want to right-click the file in our import bin, go to Modify, and then select Audio Channels. And here we're going to change the preset to stereo if it isn't already selected, and click OK. And this keeps the audio sitting in one track and makes editing easier later on. If you need to modify the audio channels to stereo in more than one of your source files, you can do so by selecting all the clips that need to be altered and then following the steps just outlined. If you've shot your video on the Canon XF100 cameras, you will need to do this for all the video files as they'll come in with 2 audio channels. Okay, so now we're going to work through selecting clips from our vision using the source monitor. Now you will remember me saying the source monitor can be used to identify certain clips or what we might refer to as grabs from your vision and bring just those down onto the timeline to work with. So we're going to look through our files and find which parts we want to use. We'll start with our vision of the interview to select some grabs and then we'll drag them down to the timeline to start forming our story. So let's just say we want to use some of clip 1. We're going to click and drag this over to the source monitor, and now it will appear inside this window. Once we're in the source monitor, we can use our play and stop toggles to have a look through. We can also grab the playhead and drag through the vision like so. A shortcut is to use the spacebar to play and also to pause. And we can use the left and right arrow keys on our keyboard to step through our video a frame at a time. So using these tools, we're going to look through our footage and find the parts that we want to use in this video. Once we've identified the section we want from the overall clip, we need to mark in and out points. So we're scrubbing through and we've found where we'd like to start our clip. And so we're going to press I on the keyboard, and I stands for in. That's our in point. You can see we've now got a blue highlighted area here, and it shows the clip we want from this video is going to start here where we've indicated this I in point. So we'll press spacebar to play, and I know that this section I want to end just as the talent finishes what he's saying and before he starts his next point, around about here. So now we're going to go ahead and press O on our keyboard, which stands for out, our out point. And we can also do this by pressing the out button below. And now we can see the blue highlighted area in the selected part of the clip. Now we've selected the part of the clip we want to use in our video, we can simply drag it down to the timeline and start editing it further. So click on the picture itself in the source monitor and then drag this down onto the timeline and release to drop it there. Now we're in the timeline and we can play that snippet that is forming the basis of our video so far. The same buttons apply as they were in the source monitor down on the timeline, so we can press spacebar to play and pause. And we can use our CTI, and CTI stands for Current Time Indicator. It's this red line with the yellow cap on top. We can use the CTI to scrub through our vision down on the timeline. I'm going to go ahead and select a few more grabs from the interview vision and bring them down onto my timeline now. So you can see this is how we essentially start to build our story. We find our different grabs from our footage, narrow these down in the source monitor with in and out points, and then we drop them down on the timeline. If I'm now to play what I have on my timeline, you'll see it play out in the program monitor, and I can see how my story is looking so far. So we found the main bits that we want to use in the source monitor, and then we can do further editing on the timeline if we want. I'm going to zoom in so we can see a little clearer, And we can do this by holding down the Alt key on our keyboard and using the scroll wheel on our mouse. If you're not using a mouse, you can drag the end of the slider down below, right to zoom out, left to zoom in. Otherwise, you can press the plus or minus keys on the keyboard. If you want to see everything that you've got on your timeline and make sure you don't have any stray clips hiding out to the right-hand side, you can simply press the backslash key, which is above the enter key on your keyboard, and that will zoom out and show everything that's on your timeline. Okay, I'm now going to walk you through some of the tools that we can use within Premiere Pro to do some actual editing down on the timeline. Okay, so we know where our toolbox is, just here off to the left of our timeline. I'll walk you through some of the main tools we'll be using. We've got the pointer tool at the very top, and that's our selection tool, and that will let us drag our clips around. And we can also lengthen and shorten our clips when we have our pointer tool selected. So if we decide we want a little more or less footage than we originally chose up in the source monitor, instead of having to set new in and out points, we can simply lengthen or shorten the clip even once it's on the timeline. You can do so by hovering over the beginning or ending of a clip until the red arrow bracket appears. This will allow you to stretch the clip out, making it longer and adding more from the larger clip, or stretch the clip in, making it shorter and cutting it down. Next, we've got the Ripple Edit tool. If we were to decide we wanted a little bit less of clip 1, but using our selection tool we made it shorter, suddenly we've got a big gap here, and that means if we play it, that gap is just blank, black space. We need all the clips to bump right up against one another. So instead of using the selection tool to shorten that clip, we're going to use the Ripple Edit tool. And then if we decrease clip 1, it will simply move clip 2 right along beside it. If we wanted a little more of clip 1 and a little less of clip 2, we can use the Rolling Edit tool. And that will allow us to extend clip 1 while shortening the beginning of clip 2. Another useful tool is the Rate Stretch tool here, which will speed clips up or slow them down. So if we squish this clip, making it smaller, it will keep what was in that clip before, but play it in a faster amount of time. So essentially speeding it up, playing it in fast motion. And if we drag it out, extending the clip to the right, it will do the opposite. It will play it out in slow motion. This is generally not something we would use for interview vision, but it can be an interesting technique when used on our cutaway vision. The last tool we're going to look at is the razor tool, which we can use to chop our clips. So if we wanted to cut a clip in half, we can use this tool to do so. Just select the razor tool and determine where you want to chop your clip in two, and simply click in that space. And you'll see now we have two separate clips where they were once one singular clip. Another way to chop a clip in half is to press Ctrl-K on your keyboard. You'll need to make sure you have the correct audio and video track that you wish to cut selected over here on the left-hand side of the timeline. I'm now going to add a layer of cutaway over my interview grabs. We do this the same way we selected sections of video using the source monitor, but with cutaway we drag it down to the timeline so it sits on the video 2 layer. In Premiere Pro, whatever is on the highest level of video takes play priority. So you will see here, if I drag my CTI back to the beginning of the timeline and press spacebar to play, my interview grab will play out, but as soon as it reaches the cutaway layered on video 2, it will play. It will take priority. Cutaway vision is how we cover cuts in our interview grabs and also how we cover sections of voiceover that doesn't have any accompanying video. More often than not, you won't need the sound of your cutaway unless it's adding context to the story. If you do not need the sound, simply determine your in and out points, and instead of clicking on the image in the source monitor, click on the little icon of the film. Just here, it's a little icon of a film strip, and drag down to your timeline. And you'll see this has brought down just the video and not the audio. Now, I will discuss one further thing before we move forward, and that's the ability to create new sequences in Premiere Pro. So you'll see at the moment your timeline that you're working on will have a little tab at the top of it, and it probably says Sequence 1. So when we started our project and we created a new sequence, you probably didn't change the name of it. So it should probably say sequence 1. And that's fine. But with Premiere Pro, you have the ability to create more sequences. So what we'll do is we'll pop up to File, down to New, and across to Sequence. The keyboard shortcut for that is Control-N, N for New. Now you want to make sure you choose the same settings as you did previously, so settings that correct settings for the vision that you're using and whatever camera you've shot it on, and you can give it a name. So the great thing about sequences is you could have a sequence that has all your interview grabs on it, and you could have a sequence that you've got all your cutaway on. So it's basically just a way of organizing within your Premiere Pro project. The other thing you can use sequences for is if you've done a first edit and then you are happy with that and you want to keep a copy of that current edit as it is, but you would like to try and make further edits, you can do so in a new sequence. So you can just select everything on the timeline, Control-C on your keyboard, go across to your other sequence and Control-V to paste. So then you've got a copy. And that way, if you make some changes that you don't like and you want to go back to the original, you've still got that sequence there with your original edit on it. Sequences are really handy and they're a good thing to know that they exist within Premiere Pro.